Tommy Robinson was arrested a day before a massive demonstration in London, but this did not deter the thousands of people who gathered to show their support.
Look at all you brave and beautiful people. What a gathering. What a sight. How proud we can all be. I wish I was there with you today. You are showing the establishment that you don't fear them. You're willing to take a stand to show all of your beautiful faces. For years, those in power have worked hard to hide the truth about what they are doing to our country. They've worked hard to label and smear anyone and everyone who speaks out against them. But today tells you they've failed. Their lives have failed. The truth is out. 38 million people who could have voted didn't vote in July's election. They didn't vote for Keir Starmer and his cronies. Only 9 million did. That's less than the population of this once great city we're in now. This government has no mandate. We know it, they know it. They are locking up dissenting voices because they fear them. Political prisoners. I'm now one of many. Keir is terrified his political incompetence will be exposed. It's too late for that, Keir. Your lie about the winter fuel allowance is just one of the lies that you've told us. Keir is terrified his allegiance to nation-state destroying globalist agendas will be exposed. How they plan to take every one of your wealth and freedom, while they, a self-appointed group of deluded fools, control Turks and exploit all of us. He'll tell you he cares. It's just another lie. Keir is terrified that his prosperity-destroying policies will be exposed. His insane commitment to the lie of net zero. Keir is terrified people will realise he has no intention at all of smashing the people smuggling gangs. They're not going to stop the boats. And they'll find out there's 745,000 illegal immigrants living in Britain right now, more than any other European country. That's the equivalent of the population of Sheffield and Southampton combined. The real figures, it could probably double. Each and every one of you is going to cost you £400,000 for each one of those individuals over their lifetime. That is £298 billion. That's 2,000 more times what they claim they've saved by cutting the pensioners' fuel allowance. Literally freezing people who paid into the system their whole life to death. And he's terrified that someone will break the super injunction when they'll find out what he's been trying so hard to hide. Keir, you should be terrified. Look at this crowd today. We are seeing a great awakening, an uprising of British people, patriots, coming together. We are sending you, Keir, a political message. We will no longer be ignored. We will mobilise politically. We will reach the 19 million people who didn't vote at all. They didn't vote, 48%. And we will return leaders to Parliament to serve us, the British people. So today, just by being here, you're making history. You are making your voices heard. You are resisting tyranny today. Enjoy today. I'm sorry I can't be there. Stand with your brothers and sisters. Stand for freedom.
The protest was a clear sign of defiance against the government and authorities, revealing deep social discontent at a time when British politics faces significant divisions. The large turnout at the event highlights the perception that the government is suppressing critical voices. For many, the detention of figures like Robinson is not merely a legal action, but a strategy to silence dissent and discourage public opposition. Such demonstrations become spaces for resistance and for asserting rights like freedom of speech. In the UK, immigration policies are at the heart of the debate. Recent data shows a substantial increase in the number of non-European immigrants entering the country, raising concerns about the strain this puts on public services, especially in London, where a significant portion of the current population is foreign-born. The impact on healthcare, education, and social infrastructure is cited as one of the main sources of discontent among some sectors of the population. The climate of frustration is intensified by criticisms of Keir Starmer's leadership and his administration. Many question the legitimacy of his government and its decisions, pointing out that in the last elections the majority of voters abstained, indicating growing distrust in the political system. This lack of participation is seen as a direct rejection of political elites and a general disillusionment with unfulfilled promises. Another relevant issue is the discussion around national sovereignty and borders. Calls for the UK to reassess its relationship with the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, have intensified, with arguments that these restrictions prevent the country from effectively controlling its migration and border policies. This narrative fuels discontent and mobilizes groups that feel the country has lost control of its sovereignty and is facing challenges that require a more assertive and independent response. The growing mobilization of critical groups and the constant pressure on the government are signs of a complex social and political landscape. As criticisms mount over how resources, immigration, and economic policy are being managed, the UK appears to be at a turning point. The massive protests in the streets suggest that, for many, the only way to be heard and create real change is to mobilize and directly confront the system. The protest also takes place within the context of a debate about immigration and its impact on daily life in the United Kingdom. Recent data has shown a significant increase in non-European immigrants in the country, raising concerns about the strain on public services such as the NHS, housing, and education. In cities like London, more than a third of residents were born outside the UK, highlighting the scale of the demographic shift. For many, these figures not only reflect a cultural transformation, but also an economic challenge, as it is argued that the massive arrival of people requires public policies to adapt in order to ensure that services remain sustainable. Furthermore, there is criticism over the government's lack of effective action in managing the borders and implementing measures to ensure proper control of illegal immigration. Keir Starmer's policies and promises have been a focal point of controversy. Since the elections, many voices have been raised questioning the legitimacy of the current leadership, especially given the low voter turnout that was recorded. For many, the fact that millions of people did not vote suggests a deep disconnect between the population and the political class. This is interpreted as a reflection of widespread distrust, fueled by what is perceived as unfulfilled electoral promises and a lack of transparency in public management. Another critical aspect is the discussion about the UK's role in international agreements like the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR. There is a growing sector that believes these agreements limit the country's ability to manage its own policies, especially regarding immigration. According to these voices, leaving the ECHR would allow the UK to have firmer control over its borders and make decisions more aligned with national concerns. The narrative that the country is losing its sovereignty resonates with many protesters, who see these demonstrations as an opportunity to pressure the government and voice their concerns. Calls to take back control and ensure policies that prioritize national interests are increasingly common at these events, showing that social unrest is far from diminishing. At the same time, the impact of mass immigration is reflected in economic data that questions the long-term sustainability of these policies. Critics argue that integrating hundreds of thousands of people into a system already under pressure from demand could lead to a collapse of essential services. This presents a dilemma for the government, which must balance humanitarian needs with the state's limited capacities. In this polarized environment, there are signs of a growing movement seeking to reshape the British political landscape. Organized groups and emerging parties are mobilizing to capitalize on social discontent, promising to represent the voices that feel ignored. The promise of a great awakening and a resurgence of British sovereignty presents a powerful narrative aimed at attracting those disenchanted with current policies and those seeking significant change in how the country is governed. With rising tensions, the future of British politics appears to be at a critical juncture. The decisions made in the coming months, especially concerning immigration and international alliances, could define the country's path for decades to come. The massive protests and growing political mobilization suggest that the country is at a turning point where citizen action could play a crucial role in reshaping power and directing the nation's future trajectory. Tensions in the United Kingdom are not only reflected in the streets, but also in the political sphere. Growing distrust towards traditional institutions is leading to an increase in support for movements and parties that present themselves as alternatives to the traditional political class. These groups aim to channel social discontent and promote changes in immigration and sovereignty policies. Amid this climate of dissatisfaction, many citizens feel that the political system has failed to represent their interests and instead has aligned itself with globalist agendas that do not reflect local concerns. This is evident in the criticism directed at figures like Keir Starmer, who is seen by some sectors as a leader disconnected from the real needs of the population. The increase in immigration, particularly from non-European countries, has intensified the perception that current policies are unsustainable in the long term. Some sectors argue that the country needs to take drastic measures to curb migration and protect public resources, while others insist that these policies must be balanced with the UK's humanitarian commitments and international obligations. At the same time, the narrative that the UK is losing control over its own political decisions is becoming central in public discourse. The pressure on the government to review or even break international agreements such as the European Convention on Human Rights reflects a growing sentiment that foreign policies should be subordinate to national priorities. The idea of reclaiming sovereignty and taking back control is a powerful message that resonates with those who feel marginalized by the decisions of the political elite. The discussion on economic sustainability is also gaining momentum. The integration of large numbers of immigrants is seen as a significant financial challenge, especially considering the growing demands on healthcare, education, and housing. For many critics, the current immigration figures are not just a statistical detail but a proof of the need to reform the system to ensure that the UK can maintain an adequate standard of living for its citizens. Finally, the political landscape is in a phase of reorganization. Whether the massive protests and social unrest translate into real change depends on how the demands are managed and whether this discontent is channeled into effective political action. The question is whether the current demonstrations and emerging voices will be able to transform the system or if the authorities will continue to try to silence these expressions of dissent, further increasing tension and discontent in the country.